Hey, what's going on? This is Mr. Ippolito, and in case you missed it, this is our rundown for Crash Course U.S. History, Episode 10, Thomas Jefferson and His Democracy. The idea was that you were supposed to identify these statements as true or false, and then, as we always do with these assignments, if the answer is false, you have to correct it to make it true. So let's go ahead and go over these, and let's see. Let's just crank these out. All right. Question number one. In the election of 1800, John Adams, a Federalist, ran against Thomas Jefferson, a Republican. That is true. So all you need to put is true for number one. Number two, because there was a tie between Adams and Jefferson, the election had to be decided by the House of Representatives, who overwhelmingly chose Adams on the first ballot. No, in the election of 1800, it wasn't a tie between Adams and Jefferson. It was a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, who famously, by the way, shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. So that part is wrong. It's not Adams and Jefferson, it's Burr and Jefferson. And then also the part about the election being decided by the House of Representatives, that's true. But overwhelmingly chose Adams. No, they had like 32 ballots, something crazy like that. And then they eventually chose Jefferson with the help of Alexander Hamilton, giving them advice, giving the Federalists advice on who they should vote for. So that was why Aaron Burr got so upset and ultimately challenged Hamilton to a duel and killed him, was because Hamilton basically robbed Aaron Burr of the presidency in the election of 1800. Okay. Number three, because of problems in the election of 1800, the 12th Amendment was passed to make the process simpler. That part is true. But then from then on, the Electoral College was abolished and the system, no. False. After the 12th Amendment, it created a system where we have tickets like we have today, right? So because the old system was, under the Constitution, the winner of the presidential election becomes president, just like today. But then the runner-up, the second place person, would become vice president. So that was fine when it was George Washington and John Adams. That was okay because that was like the plan. But then in the election of 1796, John Adams won president, and then the runner-up was Thomas Jefferson, who hated him. They were political rivals. They were from opposite political parties. Could you imagine if we still had this system today that was created under the original Constitution, where you'd have President Joe Biden and Vice President Donald Trump, the runner-up in the election? Oh my gosh, that would be crazy, right? Or even crazier, President Donald Trump, Vice President Hillary Clinton. There's no way that would work out, right? So that's why the 12th Amendment was created, because John Adams and Thomas Jefferson hated each other, and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr hated each other. And so it makes it so that you don't have this rivalry between the president and the vice president. Also, imagine if your like most hated political rival is the vice president, who will become president if you die. So like your deepest rival is like waiting for you to die so that they can have their turn. That's not, it's not how we want it to work. So the 12th Amendment changed it so that now we run as a ticket, right? We run as Donald Trump and Mike Pence, or Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So that's the reason why the 12th Amendment was created, and it totally makes sense. Like as Americans today, we're like, okay, that absolutely makes sense. So that's number three. Number four, John Adams is remembered as setting a good example because when when defeated, he passed the powers of the presidency along to his political rival in an orderly way. So number four is true. That's called the peaceful transfer of power that started after the election of 1800, when one party passed power peacefully along to the other party. And that has happened throughout our history, with a couple of exceptions. The election of 1860, after Abraham Lincoln was elected, that ended up in a civil war. And in the election of 2020, it resulted in President Trump refusing to accept the results of the 2020 election. And there was an armed insurrection at the Capitol to try to prevent Congress from certifying, from accepting the final, the certified votes from each of the states. So most of the time we have a peaceful transfer of power from one party to another. Doesn't always work that way, but most of the time we do. And we have John Adams to thank for that. So that was number four. Number five, liberty at this time meant that only white men could vote. Moreover, some people were slaves. And yeah, so number five is true. Let's move on to number six. On a personal level, however, Jefferson freed most of his slaves during his lifetime. No, he didn't. Jefferson sold off some of his slaves to pay off his debts. Jefferson had a very lavish lifestyle. And so, he had trouble with his finances. He didn't do so well financially. So wasn't that he freed most of his slaves. He sold some of them to try to, pay off his debts. But if we're talking about a president who freed his slaves, that would be George Washington. put in his will that his slaves would be freed after his death. And so but 6 is false. So there are a couple different ways that you can fix that, and I just explained why. Number 7, Gabriel's Rebellion was one of the first large slave rebellions in the U.S. organized by a blacksmith who actually planned to seize the capital of the nation. That's true. An early example of an armed insurrection in our country. That's number 7. Number 8, Virginia's response to Gabriel's Rebellion was to pass laws making life as a slave much more pleasant in the hope of quelling. No, that's false. Virginia's response was to make life much harsher for slaves, to make it more difficult for them to organize, more difficult for them to communicate, for them to gather together. And certainly it was, it was always a priority to make sure that slaves never learned to read or write, because that would give them knowledge, and knowledge is power. And they did not want slaves to have any knowledge or any power. So number 8 is false. Number 9, slaves were generally forbidden to get an education. That is very true. Just what we talked about. So that's number 9. Number 10, as President Jefferson wanted lower taxes as well as a smaller military and government. That's true. Number 11, the United States was having trouble with pirates during Jefferson's administration. That's also true. Not pirates of the Caribbean, it's pirates of the Mediterranean. We're going to be learning about that soon. That's exciting. Number 12, Jefferson appointed members of his own party to most government jobs and managed to fill the Supreme Court with Republicans. The first part of that is true. The second part is false. The challenge for Thomas Jefferson was when he took office in 1801, the government, the Constitution, was only 13 years old. And so if you think about it, how do federal judges and Supreme Court justices, how do they get a job? They get a job when there's a vacancy, right? When a previous Supreme Court justice or federal judge retires or dies. Well, the country was only 13 years old. And so there weren't really a lot of dead Supreme Court justices yet, because again, the country was not very old. And so George Washington and John Adams had filled most of those federal judge positions and the Supreme Court justice positions. And so Jefferson really didn't have much control over Supreme Court vacancies or federal judge vacancies for that matter. So he was frustrated by that. So that's how you would make number 12 true, is to just change that second part there. Number 13, the famous court case Marbury versus Madison established once and for all this. So that's false. The famous court case Marbury versus Madison, here's how you would make it true. Establish the power of judicial review. The power of judicial review is the Supreme Court's power to declare laws and executive actions unconstitutional, which is mostly what it does today, right? The Supreme Court today is the referee, whether it's state laws or federal laws. Does this law comply with the Constitution? I'll give you a good example. The Obergefell case of 2015. This was a case that dealt with same-sex marriage, and it was a lawsuit that was brought against one of the states that was not allowing same-sex marriage, was not allowing marriage equality, right? And so this couple, these two men who wanted to get married, sued their state, and it eventually went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court determined that states that are trying to prevent same-sex couples from getting married, they are violating the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. And so they decided that those laws were unconstitutional. That is the power of judicial review. Whenever the court steps in and says, government, whether it's United States government or state government, what you're doing does not comply with the Constitution, that is using the power of judicial review. So number 13, you would make that true by saying the famous court case Marbury versus Madison established once and for all the power of judicial review. Just make sure you understand what judicial review is. All right. Number 14, Jefferson and the Republicans were strict constructionists, insisting the Constitution must be read literally. That is true. So number 14 is true. Number 15, Jefferson and the Republicans were strict constructionists. Oh, I already said that. Number 15, Jefferson quadrupled the size of the U.S. He didn't quadruple the size of the U.S. with the Louisiana Purchase. He doubled it. So you could literally just cross out quadrupled and put doubled, and then number 15 would then be true if you make that fix. Number 16, the Louisiana Purchase was something specifically authorized by the Constitution. False. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the president specifically the power to buy land, right? There's no real estate clause in the United States Constitution. So this is what makes Thomas Jefferson, some would say, a hypocrite. I would just say that he's a bit of a contradiction, right? He's a bit contradictory. Thomas Jefferson and the Republicans were strict constructionists. If it's not in the Constitution, then the government can't do it. But once Jefferson became president and he's like, I have the power to create my bucolic agrarian empire, my empire of liberty, right? My country, my nation of yeoman farmers. The way we can do that, though, is we need land. And so Jefferson saw his power of the presidency as an opportunity to create this empire of liberty, this nation of farmers, but you need the land to do that. And so Jefferson inferred the power. He looked at the powers of the president and said, well, the president has the power to make treaties with other nations. And so I'm going to make a treaty with France. And in that treaty, we're going to make this agreement. We're going to give France a lot of money, $26 million, I think it was, which was a bargain for all of that land. And in exchange, they're going to give us the Louisiana Purchase, which effectively doubled the size of the United States. So number 16 is false, and I just explained how to make that true. Number 17, Lewis and Clark were sent by Jefferson. That's true. All of that is true. Number 17 is true. And then number 18, Jefferson cut off trade with Britain to punish them for kidnapping American sailors. That is called impressment, when the British were kidnapping American sailors and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. That is called impressment. We're going to learn more about that as we continue moving towards the War of 1812. So number 18 is also true. Number 19, Jefferson strongly believed that a strong America in the future meant the nation must industrialize and develop a manufacturing base. That is false. We could make that true in a couple of different ways. First of all, those beliefs that you're reading right there, those were the beliefs of Hamilton and the Federalists. So you could cross out Jefferson and put Hamilton. You could cross out Jefferson and put the Federalists, or you could replace the second half. You could say Jefferson strongly believed that a strong America in the future meant that the nation must be a nation of, begins with the letter Y. What is it? Yeoman farmers, right? So that would make number 19 true. And then finally, number 20, Jefferson is an enigma, which means he's a puzzle, a riddle, because he claimed to want small government, but he expanded federal power more than any president had done before. Number 20, that is true. Jefferson was an enigma. He was a puzzle. He was a walking contradiction, because on the one hand, he kind of said one thing. He says he wants small government, but he used the power of the presidency to interpret in the Constitution the power to double the size of the United States. And Jefferson was also an enigma, I think, a riddle, a puzzle, a contradiction, because on the one hand, he wrote some of those beautiful language in American history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And yet Jefferson himself was a slaveholder. So a puzzle, a riddle, an enigma, as some other of our historical figures are, right? So anyway, I hope that helps. And if you have any other questions, then reach out to me. Otherwise, that was Thomas Jefferson and his democracy from Crash Course U.S. History. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.